He wasn't just my boss. He was a man who controlled my future. When he offered to take me on a business trip, I thought it was just about work, just another chance to prove myself. But the moment the hotel door clicked shut, the air shifted. His eyes lingered too long. His voice dropped lower. My heart raced, tore between fear and something I couldn't name. I should have walked away that night, but instead, I stayed.
That trip changed everything.
I never thought a simple work trip would alter the way I saw him, or myself. When my boss first told me about the upcoming trip, it sounded routine. Just a few days away from the office, meetings with clients, and some late-night preparations. Nothing unusual. I had been working under him for almost a year, and though he was strict, he was also one of the most respected people in the company. People admired him, feared him, and depended on him all at once. At the time, I was 24, ambitious, and eager to prove myself. He was in his mid-30s, polished and confident in a way that demanded attention. He didn't speak much more than necessary, but when he did, you listened. I always made sure I did. The morning we left for the trip, the office felt unusually quiet. Everyone had wished us luck, joking about how I was lucky to get away from the constant grind for a while. I laughed it off, but inside, I was nervous. This wasn't just about the project. It was about being alone with him for the first time, outside of the walls where roles and routines kept us safe. The drive started off calm, the hum of the car filling the silence. He asked me a few questions about my plans, my family, my future, things he never bothered with in the office. I caught myself noticing the way his hand gripped the steering wheel, the way his shirt sleeves were rolled up just enough to reveal veins along his forearm. It was a stupid detail, but my eyes lingered. Too long. I turned to the window quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed. Conversation stayed safe at first. Work deadlines, clients, ideas. But as the miles stretched, something shifted. He started telling me things about his life. Personal stories I never thought he would share. How he hated the loneliness of hotels. How the pressure of leadership sometimes made him doubt himself. He spoke softer than usual, almost like he was letting me in on a side of him no one else saw. And I listened quietly, carefully, holding every word. By the time we arrived at the hotel, my nerves had settled a little. We checked in, got our keys, and agreed to meet in the lobby for dinner. Nothing out of the ordinary. But as I set my bag down in my room, a thought slipped into my head, uninvited. Why did it feel so different being here with him? Dinner was casual, yet strangely intimate. The restaurant was quiet, candlelight reflecting off his glass as he leaned forward, asking me questions I wasn't prepared for. "What do you want out of all this?" he asked. "All what?" "Your life, your work, yourself." I hesitated. No one at the office asked questions like that. No one ever seemed to care. And yet, sitting across from him, I felt like I had to answer honestly. I told him things I had never said out loud, dreams and fears that I usually kept locked away. He listened, nodding, sometimes smiling in a way that wasn't his usual professional smile. It was warmer, softer. When we finally returned to our rooms, something about the air had shifted. We weren't just boss and employee anymore. Not entirely. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, his words echoing in my mind. Something about his gaze over dinner, something about the pause in his voice before he spoke again, left me unsettled. The next morning started normally. Meetings, handshakes, the expected politeness of business trips. But in between, I found myself watching him when I shouldn't. The way his tie loosened during breaks. The way his laugh escaped, low, rare, and genuine, when a client told a joke. It was like I was noticing things that had always been there but had suddenly become sharp, unavoidable. That evening, after a long day of presentations, he suggested we skip the hotel restaurant and try something in the city instead. I agreed, maybe too quickly. The streets buzzed with energy as we walked, and though I tried to focus on the neon signs and passing strangers, my attention kept circling back to him. How close he walked, the brush of his arm when the crowd pushed in. At dinner, the atmosphere was even more relaxed than the night before. We laughed more, the conversation flowing effortlessly between work and life. There were pauses, though, small silences where our eyes lingered on each other just a little too long. When the bill came, he covered it without a word. I wanted to argue, but the look he gave me stopped me. It wasn't the look of a boss shutting down an employee. It was something else, something that left a strange warmth in my chest. We walked back to the hotel slower than necessary. The air was cool, and I remember feeling like the night itself was holding its breath. He asked me about my past relationships, his tone casual but his eyes sharper than usual. I stumbled through an answer, feeling exposed. When I asked about his, he gave only fragments, enough to make me wonder what he was holding back. Back in the hotel, we paused at the elevators. For a moment, neither of us moved. He looked at me like he was about to say something, but then the doors opened, breaking the spell. "Good night," he said simply, and disappeared into the elevator. I stood there for a long moment before heading to my room. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every glance, every pause, every word that had carried more weight than it should have. I told myself it was just in my head, that I was overthinking, that he didn't mean anything by it. But another part of me, the quieter, more dangerous part, whispered that maybe he did. And as I finally drifted into restless sleep, I knew one thing for certain. This trip was not going to stay just business.
When silence spoke louder.
The next morning began with routine, meetings, presentations, follow-ups. On the surface, everything looked professional, polished, exactly as expected. But beneath the structure of business, something else lingered between us, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. I noticed it first in the pauses, the way his eyes would meet mine during a presentation and hold for a second too long before shifting back to client, the way he'd stand just close enough for me to feel the heat radiating off his body when we looked over documents together. I told myself it was nothing, just the closeness of work, the pressure of travel, the strangeness of being away from familiar walls. But my chest tightened every time. At lunch, we sat across from each other at a crowded cafe. The noise around us made it easy to hide inside our own bubble. He leaned forward when he spoke, his voice low, and I caught myself focusing not on his words, but on the curve of his mouth as he formed them. "You're quiet today," he said suddenly. I blinked, just tired. He tilted his head, studying me in a way that made it hard to breathe. "You're lying." It wasn't an accusation, not exactly. More like an observation. I forced a small laugh, deflecting, but inside, my pulse was racing. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Work continued. Professional masks slipped back on, but every stolen glance felt heavier than the last. That evening, he suggested we grab a drink at the hotel bar before heading up. I hesitated, telling myself I should decline. That one drink could turn into something I wasn't ready for. But I agreed anyway. The bar was dimly lit, quiet, with soft music humming in the background. We sat at the counter, shoulders almost brushing, as the bartender slid 2 glasses in front of us. "To a successful trip," he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his, the sound sharp in the hushed room. Conversation flowed more easily this time, loosened by the warmth of alcohol. He asked about my childhood, my first job, my failures. I answered honestly, feeling strangely safe. When I asked about him, his answers were shorter, but his eyes carried a weight I didn't know how to read. At one point, our hands brushed as we both reached for the small bowl of peanuts between us. It should have been nothing, just skin against skin for the briefest second. But it wasn't. I froze, and so did he. Neither of us pulled away immediately. The moment stretched, suspended, until finally he cleared his throat and shifted his hand. I exhaled slowly, pretending it hadn't shaken me, though my heart thundered against my ribs. We stayed longer than we should have, both reluctant to end the night. When we finally stood, walking toward the elevators, I felt the weight of every silence pressing down on us. Inside the elevator, it was just the two of us. He stood so close that his arm brushed mine, with every slight movement of the lift. The air felt thick, charged. I stared straight ahead, afraid of what would happen if I looked at him. The doors opened. Relief and disappointment tangled inside me as we stepped out. "Good night," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Good night." But neither of us moved toward our rooms immediately. We lingered, caught in a moment that neither dared to break. Finally, he turned, walking away. I watched him go, every step pulling something out of me I couldn't name. That night, I tossed in bed, replaying the day over and over. The glance across the cafe, the touch at the bar, the way his voice seemed to soften only when it was directed at me. It wasn't just in my head anymore. Something was happening. The next day, the tension only deepened. In the middle of a meeting, his hand brushed my shoulder as he leaned in to point something out. The touch lasted a fraction of a second, but the heat of it lingered like a brand. Later, during a coffee break, he stood beside me, close enough that his sleeve brushed mine. "You're distracted," he murmured. "I'm fine." "You're not." I turned to him, ready to argue, but the look in his eyes silenced me. It wasn't his usual authority or even curiosity. It was something sharper, something that made my chest ache. Before I could respond, someone walked in, breaking the moment. I stepped back quickly, the fear of being seen rushing through me. No one could know, no one could suspect. That evening, we ordered room service to his room, both too tired to go out. We ate sitting across from each other on the small table near the window, the city lights flickering outside. Conversation drifted again, deeper this time. He told me about regrets he carried, choices he wished he'd made differently. I listened, feeling the weight of his words settle into me. At one point, he reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close enough that the intention was unmistakable. "You know," he said quietly, "you surprised me." I swallowed hard. "How?" "You see things differently. You make me think." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, words refusing to come. The silence between us grew heavy, charged. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. His gaze held me, and I felt something shift, like a line we had both been tiptoeing around was suddenly in danger of breaking. Then it happened. His hand brushed mine again, deliberate this time. My breath caught, the world narrowing down to that single point of contact. I should have pulled away. I should have said something, anything, to stop what was happening. But I didn't. The air buzzed, thick with the danger of it all. If someone knocked on the door, if anyone walked in, everything would unravel. My career, his reputation, both of our lives. It all balanced on this fragile, reckless moment. He leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "If this is wrong," he said, "tell me to stop." I couldn't. Every part of me screamed that it was reckless, dangerous, something I would regret. And yet, beneath the fear, there was thrill, a pull I couldn't resist. For the first time, I didn't feel like his employee. I felt like something else entirely. And as the silence swallowed us whole, I knew we had already crossed a line we couldn't uncross.
The night the line disappeared,
The hotel room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the muted glow of the city lights outside the window. I hadn't planned on being here again. Sitting across from him at the small table, half-empty glasses between us. But something about the night had pulled us both in, as if the silence itself demanded a conclusion. He leaned back in his chair, his shirt slightly undone at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His eyes never left mine. "You've been avoiding me," he said softly. "I haven't." My voice cracked. "Yes, you have." He didn't smile. He just studied me like he was trying to read every thought I wasn't saying. I swallowed, forcing myself to look away, but my gaze drifted back almost immediately. "Maybe I'm just trying to be careful." "Careful," he repeated, almost like a question, then quieter. "Do you want to be careful?" The room thickened with his words. My pulse hammered. "I don't know." His hand reached across the table, this time with no hesitation, covering mine. I froze, heat rushing my face, my throat, everywhere. "You do know," he whispered. I should have pulled back. I should have reminded him and myself who he was to me, who I was to him. But instead, I just sat there, unable to move, as his thumb brushed slowly over my knuckles. It was nothing and everything at once. A knock at the door shattered the moment. We both jerked back instantly, chairs scraping. "Room service." A voice called. I exhaled sharply, almost laughing at the absurdity of how close we'd just been. He stood across the room and opened the door, taking the tray from the attendant like nothing had happened. But when he closed the door again, his eyes met mine, darker this time, and I knew whatever line we'd been walking was already gone. We ate in silence, though neither of us seemed hungry. Every scrape of a fork, every glance across the table, felt amplified. Finally, he set his fork down. "This is insane," he muttered. "Then stop. Do you want me to?" His voice was low, raw. I hesitated too long. That was my answer. He pushed back his chair, moving closer. My chest tightened as he stopped just inches away, his presence filling the room. "Tell me no," he said. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. His hand reached up, brushing against my jaw, slow, deliberate. My breath hitched. "This is wrong," I whispered. "Maybe." His thumb traced along my cheek. "But it doesn't feel wrong." The silence was unbearable. I should have moved. I didn't. And then quietly it happened. He leaned in. His lips brushed mine for the briefest second, tentative, like he was giving me one last chance to pull away. I didn't. The kiss deepened, slow but desperate, carrying every unspoken thing between us. Shame burned in my chest, but so did something else. A release, a surrender I couldn't resist. When we finally pulled apart, I couldn't meet his eyes. My hands trembled. "What are we doing?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. He just watched me, his breathing uneven, something we can't undo. My heart sank, because he was right. A sudden noise from the hallway, voices passing by, snapped us back to reality. We pulled apart instantly, like guilty teenagers caught in the act. I moved to the window, staring out at the glowing city below, my chest heaving. "This could ruin everything," I said, my voice barely steady. "Maybe it already has," he replied. The weight of his words crushed me. Minutes passed in silence. Finally, I turned, unable to hold it in. "Why me?" His eyes softened. "Because you make me feel like I'm not alone." The honesty in his voice nearly broke me. We stood there, staring, suspended between choice and consequence. I wanted to hate him for pulling me into this, but a part of me knew I hadn't exactly resisted. When he stepped closer again, I didn't move back. And that night, the line we had been so careful not to cross disappeared completely. The hours blurred, heavy with whispers, stolen touches, and the unshakable knowledge that tomorrow nothing would be the same. Every moment carried thrill tangled with dread, as though at any second someone would knock, the world would collapse, and everything we kept hidden would be dragged into the light. But no one came. It was just us. Two people caught in a storm they had both tried to outrun, finally surrendering to it. And as dawn crept into the room, painting the walls with pale light, reality settled over me like a weight I couldn't shake. What we had done couldn't be erased. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again.
The morning after truth.
The next morning felt unreal, like I had woken into someone else's life. The sheet still held his warmth, the air still heavy with what we had done, but the silence between us was unbearable. Neither of us knew what to say, so we pretended. He checked his phone. I busied myself with packing. Every gesture screamed avoidance. On the drive back, he barely spoke. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, eyes fixed on the road. I stared out the window, trying to memorize the blur of trees and highway, just to keep from drowning in the thoughts circling my mind. When we reached the city, he dropped me off without even turning off the engine. Just one look, heavy, unreadable, before he said, "Take care." And then he was gone. Weeks passed. We never spoke of that night again. At work, everything appeared normal, but our stolen glances betrayed the truth. There was a quietness in the way we moved around each other, a mutual understanding that silence was safer than honesty. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if he regretted it, or if, like me, he replayed it in the dark, equal parts shame and longing. I'll never know. Maybe that's a punishment, carrying a memory too heavy to share, too vivid to forget, because some lines, once crossed, redraw your entire life. And no matter how deeply you bury them, they leave scars that never fade. Tell me, what's the one word that captures how this story made you feel? Confused? Exposed? Heartbroken? Or maybe something only you can name? Drop it in the comments below. And if you've ever lived through a moment where desire and silence collided, you're not alone. Share your own story if you're ready. Someone out there needs to hear it. Oh! And stay tuned, because my next story starts with a locked door, a whisper, and a secret that should never have been shared.